As we were getting ready to start this show tonight, there was a flurry of news about the Russia investigation. We're going to have a special report on tomorrow's show about why President Trump, at a personal level, why he might be particularly nervous about the turn the Robert Mueller special counsel investigation seems to be making toward investigating banking and business practices and financial transactions. We're going to have a special report on the president's particular concerns about the investigation taking that turn. If you were not planning on watching tomorrow night's show because you had like a hot Friday night date or something, here's your fair warning that you're maybe going to be washing your hair instead. You can just make it a Saturday night date or something. I will write you a note. We're going to have that special report tomorrow, basically on why there is a big uh-oh for the president himself with things turning toward finances. Today, of course, Bloomberg reported that the special counsel headed by Robert Mueller, that investigation is absolutely going down the financial and banking path when it comes specifically to Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Quoting from the Bloomberg report, Mueller's team of investigators has sent Mueller's team of investigators has sent subpoenas in recent weeks from a Washington grand jury to global banks for account information and records of transactions involving Manafort and some of his companies. We're going to be talking with Greg Farrell, who's one of the investigative reporters from Bloomberg who broke that story today, about what exactly those subpoenas mean and what Paul Manafort's options might be in terms of responding to those or not. The pressure on Paul Manafort right now, we know, must be intense. Last night, Politico.com reported that the Mueller investigation was squeezing one of Paul Manafort's family members, his son-in-law, with an eye toward getting the son-in-law to become a cooperating witness against his father-in-law, Paul Manafort. Today, CNN follows up that reporting with news that Paul Manafort's son-in-law has, in fact, met with federal prosecutors on these issues. And that, of course, comes on the heels of news first broken by the Washington Post that the FBI recently launched a pre-dawn raid at Paul Manafort's home in Northern Virginia. Now, the president himself was asked about that FBI raid today, and he gave a response that not even within hours, within minutes, started to factually fall apart.
Mr. President, was it appropriate for the FBI to raid the home of Paul Manafort pre-dawn?
I thought it was a very, very strong signal or whatever. I know Mr. Manafort. I haven't spoken to him in a long time, but I know him. He was with the campaign, as you know, for a very short period of time, relatively short period of time, but I've always known him to be a good man. I thought it was a very, they do that very seldom. So I was surprised to see it. I was very, very surprised to see it. We haven't really been involved.
We haven't really been involved. See the president kind of minimizing the role of his campaign chairman in the campaign, saying, oh, yeah, you know, for a very short period of time, he was running my campaign. And then saying about this raid, you know, we haven't really been involved. The president made those remarks today in the 4 o'clock hour Eastern time. At 5:03 p.m. Eastern time, he was proved very dramatically wrong in that assertion. At 5:03 p.m., the Wall Street Journal published this story. See the headline there? Trump attorney calls FBI's raid on Manafort's home a gross abuse. While the president was declaring that we have no involvement whatsoever in whatever's going on with Paul Manafort in this FBI raid, while the president was declaring that, the Wall Street Journal was busy uploading this story, letting the cat out of the bag that, in fact, despite what the president was saying about we have no involvement in this, in fact, the president's lawyer, a man who is apparently now serving as his lead attorney on Russia matters, John Dowd, he's absolutely involved in Paul Manafort, and specifically on that question of the FBI raid that was carried out in conjunction with Bob Mueller's investigation. Apparently at 3:48 in the morning this morning, the president's lawyer, John Dowd, was up and sending misspelled emails to the Wall Street Journal, ripping that FBI raid, ripping Bob Mueller, and making all sorts of legal allegations and legal threats about the Mueller investigation and the FBI's treatment of Paul Manafort. Quote, this extraordinary invasive tool was employed for its shock value to try to intimidate Mr. Manafort and bring him to his knees. According to the Wall Street Journal, the president's attorney then said that the raid on Manafort's home was, quote, extraordinarily invasive and a gross abuse. He alleged that the FBI, quote, seized privileged and confidential materials prepared for Mr. Manafort by his counsel to aid him in his cooperation with the congressional committees. The president's lawyer said, quote, these failures by special counsel to exhaust less intrusive methods is a fatal flaw in the warrant process and would call for a motion to suppress the fruits of the search. So this is not Paul Manafort's lawyer sending these complaints. This is the president's lawyer. This is President Trump's personal lawyer threatening his, motion to suppress the fruits of the raid on Paul Manafort's house. Sending that email just before 4 in the morning today, warning about Paul Manafort being brought to his needs. I mean, it's whatever you make about the truthfulness of the statements here, this is bad strategy by the president and his legal team. You shouldn't have the president making a manifestly different representation about this relationship than the president's lawyer, right? Paul Manafort is somebody who the president is now calling Mr. Manafort, saying, yeah, I think I remember him, trying to claim he was only involved in the campaign for a very short amount of time. The president very clearly trying to distance himself from Manafort, saying explicitly, we have no involvement whatsoever in these Paul Manafort legal troubles with the special counsel and this FBI raid. Well, we know that is not true because the president's lawyer proves it not to be true. So the president's lawyer and the president being on completely different pages on this very basic issue is a bad sign in terms of what kind of representation the president is getting in terms of his legal representation on this very serious issue. Why is the president's lawyer weighing in on Paul Manafort's behalf like this in this angry email to the Wall Street Journal? Paul Manafort is not his client. I mean, that, too, is an important question about the quality of the president's legal representation. It's also an interesting question about Paul Manafort's legal representation, which, frankly, has always had something a little hinky about it. I don't want to make too big a deal out of this, but I got to tell you, we saw this coming, and now it has fallen apart. In the middle of last month, you might remember a story that we did about this law firm, WilmerHale, right? WilmerHale is a big, famous, prestigious American law firm. One of its highest profile partners was Robert Mueller. Robert Mueller left WilmerHale, cashed in his partnership there in order to take his job as special counsel. And WilmerHale has gotten itself into a little bit of a quandary around the Russia investigation because there's Bob Mueller, having just left as a named partner at the firm to go be the special counsel on Russia, while one of WilmerHale's other very high-profile partners, another person who used to be a very high-ranking government official, is a lawyer named Jamie Gorelick. For a long time now, Jamie Gorelick has been the lead counsel for Jared Kushner in all sorts of different matters, including the Russia investigation. Now, Bob Mueller technically quit his role at that firm in order to become special counsel, but that still becomes sort of a dicey issue for WilmerHale, right? Is it okay, even if you're a big law firm, to have your highest profile partner and your highest profile former partner working on opposite sides of a major case like this? Right? That's a dicey issue, right? That's an arguable issue in terms of the legal ethics of that and the practicalities of that. So we did a story about this last month. In the middle of last month, in fact, Jamie Gorelick, Jared Kushner's lawyer, had to step aside as Jared Kushner's lead counsel on matters related to the Russia investigation. I mean, she continues to represent him on other things. But when it comes to Russia, that conflict, because of Bob Mueller's association with WilmerHale, with her law firm, she had to step aside, let somebody else take over Russia issues for Jared Kushner. And the whole reason we brought it up last month, I remember saying on the air, I'm going to figure this out. This makes no sense. The whole reason that has stuck in my craw, and the reason we brought that up on the show, is because that problem being settled around Jared Kushner's legal representation raised a really big question for Paul Manafort. Because Jared Kushner lost his main Russia lawyer last month because of that conflict, because she worked at Bob Mueller's old law firm. That was seen as a conflict. But you know who else worked at Bob Mueller's old law firm? Paul Manafort's lawyer. So why did Jared have to lose his Russia lawyer? Because that lawyer worked at WilmerHale, but Paul Manafort got to keep his Russia lawyer, who also worked at WilmerHale. It didn't make any sense that there could be a conflict there for Jared, but not a conflict for Paul Manafort. It never made any sense. I'm going to figure this out. Today, we figured it out. Today, those pieces all either fell into place or fell apart, depending on how you look at it. We started to hear reports earlier this evening that Paul Manafort's legal representation was getting a big shakeup. We actually called Paul Manafort's attorney at WilmerHale. We called Reg Brown to ask if those reports we were hearing were true. He hung up on us, and then within about an hour, it was official. Paul Manafort has now dropped his lawyer on the Russia investigation. Reg Brown at WilmerHale will no longer be representing Paul Manafort on Russia. Instead, Paul Manafort has a new legal team representing him on Russia. One of his new lead lawyers has a resume and a list of areas of expertise that gives you a very, very clear indication of what Manafort thinks his representation needs are right now. Manafort's legal team will apparently now be led by an attorney who spent years as his name is Kevin Downing. He spent years as a prosecutor in the tax division at the Justice Department. Look at the list of his areas of practices. His areas of practice include the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, tax fraud, violations of the Bank Secrecy Act, mortgage fraud, tax shelter litigation, illegal cross-border banking, and congressional investigations. It's like if you created a doll out of spare parts specifically to answer all of Paul Manafort's potential legal concerns. I should also mention that he's a certified CPA, which seems smart. Paul Manafort's new legal team will also include one other prominent lawyer. Do you know the name Claire George? That's not the lawyer, but that's an important part of understanding who the lawyer is. Claire is very rarely a man's first name, but in this case, it is. Claire George is famous for a decades-long, swashbuckling James Bond career at the CIA. But what Claire George is most famous for is the way his career ended. Claire George, in 1992, became the first ever senior CIA official to be convicted of felony offenses for crimes he committed while he was serving in his position at CIA. Claire George was the third-ranking official at the CIA. He was Deputy Director of Operations when he was charged with multiple felony counts in conjunction with the Iran-Contra affair. Ultimately, Claire George was convicted of perjury and lying to Congress in December 1992. And here's the kind of aha moment about that history and Claire George and what's going on right now. Claire George was convicted in federal court in 1992 on December 9th. His tenure as a convicted felon, however, lasted only 15 days. Because on December 24th, that same year, 15 days after he was convicted, on Christmas Eve, then President George H.W. Bush pardoned him. And the lawyer who represented Claire George through that, who saw him through being the highest-ranking senior CIA official ever convicted of federal crimes for his actions as a CIA officer, but then immediately got him pardoned by the president, that lawyer who saw him through that process is named Richard Hybe, and he will be the other tentpole holding up Paul Manafort's new legal team. Pardons. The investigative reporter who broke this new news about the kind of legal trouble Paul Manafort and the Trump campaign chair is facing, that investigative reporter is going to join us live in studio here next.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.